This episode of SmashTeeVee was brought to you by Robotron. Viewer discretion is advised. Not for children under 16 and best avoided by easily offended people. Today's episode of SmashTeeVee will be something special. We will be discussing controversial movies, films that for some reason or another are frowned upon, often banned or shunned, difficult movies with difficult topics many people who say should be banned and removed from life. Poppycock I say. Although these movies are on many a blacklist, censorship is never the road to take. A warned person counts for two they say, so let me tell you whether or not these movies are supposed to be dropped, checked, or smashed. Zip-dee-doo-dah, zip-dee-day, my oh my what a wonderful day, plenty of sunshine, shining away, zip-dee-doo-dah, zip-dee-day. This song has been a favorite of mine since construction. When I saw Song of the South for the first time on television, it was a delightful movie and I, to no one's surprise, was very much surprised that Song of the South was a banned movie. So now, 3 decades later, I decided to re-watch it and see what all the fuss is about. Song of the South tells the story of a little boy who moves into a new home with his mother. His father leaves the household, leaving the boy alone and looking for a father figure. That person he finds in Uncle Remus, one of the slaves on the plantation, who tells stories about a devious little rabbit called Bread Rabbit and gives the little boy valuable insights into life and his problems. Song of the South is a wonderful movie with colorful characters, no pun intended, and combines live-action film with animation. The main problem people seem to have, as far as I've read, is that everything is just hunky-dory in this film. There's no real mention of slavery, no whips, no N-words, no suffering a broken bar. It all feels quite nice, frankly, and to be honest, that's not the point of the film. This isn't Roots. This isn't 12 Years a Slave. This is a movie about a boy who loses a father figure and finds it in a joyful man. A man who is black, who even opposes a rule given by his mistress, the boy's mum, because it's the right thing to do. She even admits her own fault later in the film. They live together and that's that. Could they have chosen a different setting? Sure. Could they not have used certain depictions that could have been a little more subtle? Definitely. Could they have used another accent? Sure. But I only heard Shrek's donkey and the Wayans brothers, to name only a few. But to ban this and equate it to Birth of a Nation is a bit too much. There are many movies that are way more racist than this one, with a way more skewed worldview. All I learned from this film as a kid, and an adult, is that wise, kind people are everywhere, regardless of the color of their skin, status in society, age, sex, or composure. Respect and friendship and a joyous, happy life that can be possible. One where fantasy and reality meet, so we can all say that there's a bluebird on our shoulder. Zip-dee-doo-dah, zip-dee-day. Smash that. Time for maybe the most controversial film on this list. 2010's A Serbian Film, banned in 46 countries and generally considered a brutal and disgusting film. It took me a while to get myself to watch this. Having read many opinions and reviews, it was a movie I was kind of hesitant to see. Now these beautiful red eyes have already seen many things. Fake things, real things, bad things, and now I can say that I have seen this as well. A Serbian Film tells us the story of a fallen porn actor who, despite having a loving family, seems to miss the lifestyle of screwing beautiful women. I know, right? That's tough. When a secretive but highly lucrative job opportunity pops up, he decides to jump back into the business, or at least, an offshoot of said business. As time progresses, however, he finds himself going down a deep dark hole. When he wakes up at home a couple of days later, bloodied and beaten, his family is missing. He ventures out to find the truth, and that truth isn't a nice one. In fact, it's safe to say that this film isn't for virgin eyes. Let me clarify that I, with my vast experience, expected worse. Don't get me wrong, many of the scenes are tough to watch, but the really bad scenes are short and viewed by filming a camera. It not only creates a certain disconnect but also doesn't make it the one thing you view in said moment. Add to that the fact that this is an actual film, nothing in it is real. They use props, camera tricks, the works. Due to this, these scenes had less impact on me, due to the fact there's stuff like this out there that is, unfortunately, real. Seeing it in this film only made me think of that. The scene in U Bowl's Dart with the infant was more shocking due to the fact it was unexpected. The scene in this movie I know was going to happen is still shocking and violent, shows every single inch of depravity that humanity can have. But it's fake and it was less than I expected it to be. It still wanted me to bash the person's head in, but hey, other scenes are equally violent and brutal as in many other movies, so even those are nothing new. What surprised me most was that there were some humorous moments in the film. For example, and without spoilers, taking revenge and killing someone in that way at the end is just ludicrous. Not expected either was the actual message behind the film. This isn't just gore like August Underground, for example. It is an actual story. It's beautifully shot with some very nice shots and camera angles, subtle coloring, and having pretty Eastern European women doesn't detract either. The message of the film will of course be different for each person. For me it was the steady decline in a person's morals when he starts going into depravity, a slow descent into an ever-increasing desire for more no matter what the cost, like a drug. Seeking for that extra amount of dopamine cause the previous thing doesn't work anymore. It's about crime and unscrupulous vile human beings, and I guess you can say it's about Serbia too. At least that's what the director said at one point. This movie doesn't make the mistake by condoning the actions in the film. Our main character is against it at all times, only fueled by drugs and rage. The film, due to this, counters all the actions and puts you in a space of rejection for those actions which any sane and moral person would do. It's not like a certain controversial Netflix movie or August Underground that pretends this is normal stuff to do and should be accepted. A Serbian Film isn't a happy movie, and that's not a spoiler either since it's one of the taglines. There are moments of happiness in it, however, before shit hits the fan. And even at the end, after all, we have witnessed a glimmer of help arises, after which it's pretty much snatched away by the hand of the uncaring. A life lesson, I dare say. A hard one. But life is hard, especially during certain times. A Serbian Film isn't a must-see simply because of the nature of the film. Most people should not see this film. People like me, however, who have already stared into the abyss, can watch it and realize, again, that the abyss is something you do not stare into, merely glimpse at, so you remember that it's there, swallowing innocence and ruining lives. Tread carefully with this movie. It isn't as bad as most reviews say it is. It's a movie. There's real stuff out there that's much worse. Check that. Leni Riefenstahl's movie about the National Socialist Party rally at Nuremberg might be one of the most controversial movies ever, and this mainly due to what it is about, Hitler and the Nazis. Calling this a movie is a bit far-fetched since there is no true story nor plot that a real movie has. It's a propaganda film depicting how great the German people are and what the National Socialists are doing at the point of filming in 1935. A mere 5 years before the world blew up, a mere decade before the real horrors of the regime came to light. In this black and white movie we have some nice bands of the German landscape, cities and people. Many men and women, boys and girls, greeting Adolf as he enters the town, greeted as some kind of savior. Watching it made me wonder where every single person filmed is at this point in time. What happened to them? Are they still alive? Do they mention the cameo at dinner parties? Look, this is me. Next is the tent camp and all the boys and men active there having fun, all accompanied by German papa music, some of which is pretty catchy stuff. Not a fat person in sight, all fit young men happy to work and do stuff with a smile on their face. Stuff is poured in metal containers and it reminded me of how things were before plastics entered our lives. There were a couple of scenes where I laughed out loud since it all seemed a bit silly. Some of Hitler's expressions are gold too, and I'm not even mentioning the dude sweating his ass off while on stage. Either it was very hot, or he was pretty nervous. Anyways, this is a serious movie though. Similar to many political propaganda flicks, this is just way more loaded than normal political parties due to the history behind it. There's an impressive presence of people attending the rally, no camera tricks or angles to fool anyone or other. Another funny part of the movie is when a certain officer calls out his comrades in the crowd, after which they all proudly turn their heads and yell where they are from. It would be less funny if they didn't all turn their heads like they did, though it reminded me of the first season intro of Babylon 5 where everyone turns and smiles. Anywho, serious movie. Stuff gets really serious however when the Nazi party top starts speaking to the Nuremberg crowd. They all pass the review, from Himmler to Hitler and back, spreading the party mottos and praising the German people in an attempt to bring back the honor that was taken from them after World War I. The movie was created right after the murder spree, the Night of the Long Knives, so many earlier prominent Sturmabteilung or SAR members weren't there. Watching this movie alone isn't enough. You will need to do some research on it afterwards to get context. Most scenes were rehearsed, up to 50 times. Many were staged. They did use long focus lenses to create a distorted perspective and other stuff. In short, Triumph Day Willens is a very impressive propaganda movie and a must-see movie for everyone for a purely historical reason. Many political movies and clips took their inspiration from this film, and in the 60 years since then things only got worse propaganda-wise. This film won several awards and is considered to be one of the most influential documentaries ever made. Watch it, research it, learn from it. Check that. Abel Ganz 5-hour epic movie. Napoleon isn't a controversial movie in the strict sense, but with its 5.5-hour runtime, usage of color, split screen and other effects, it was, and still is, quite an amazing movie. Especially since it was made in 1927. It took me a while to get to this movie because 5 hours is quite the time investment, even though I spend 10 hours a day watching movies and series. It's of course due to the fact you have to pay attention for 100%, seeing there's no audible dialogue, being it's a silent film. But this, my friends, isn't your normal silent film. Sure, it has no speech and everything is done with cards, but my dear lord, this is one epic movie that goes through some very nifty ideas and cinematography for its time. Napoleon follows the story of the infamous Napoleon Bonaparte from its childhood, where he played war by throwing snowballs with his fellow students, to the moment he is praised as the savior of France, winning a war in Italy. It doesn't go to his downfall at Waterloo, however, and this film paints a pretty picture of the man in general, but this film isn't a character study per se. It's a film praising the man, his life and France in general. You can't help but get swept up in the character. As a bullied and disliked kid with a pet eagle to his objections about the slaughter during the French Revolution, his first steps into military strategy, the discovery of his great love Josephine, who, if I am to believe this movie, had quite the impact on him. Napoleon is beautifully shot despite having missed footage and renovations, but this 2016 restoration I saw was quite the feat. Ganz uses camera trickery and colors in his film to purvey emotion and grandeur, especially during the final act where we pretty much have our first wide scene, using 3 cameras to have this epic stretched view of armies and battles. Of course it has its flaws. The shots don't line up all the time and there's differences in shade, but still, one could imagine that without knowing our level of cinema that seeing this on a big screen would have been phenomenal. The music also doesn't disappoint, featuring many familiar tunes and sweeping you up in the final act in such a way that you are almost cheering to be a Frenchman, even though you're not. It becomes even worse when the 3-camera triptych Ganz setup is colored in with the colors of the French flag, colors that were used during the film as well, by the way. I watched the film with 2 bathroom breaks and I must say that this film doesn't bore me at all. There's plenty to see in every scene and the visual trickery Ganz uses makes it all the more compelling. The actors and set pieces are great. In short, it's considered an epic and a classic for a reason. You would be remiss not to see this film. I know, silent movies are tough to get into, but this one puts the bar high enough that you won't have a problem with it. If you think 5 hours and a half isn't enough, you can wait for the restoration of the almost 7-hour-long so-called Apollo version. That is the version of Napoleon shown at the Apollo Theatre in Paris in 1927. Conducted by Cinémathèque Française and financed by the National Center for Cinema and the Moving Image along with Netflix. that was scheduled to be completed by the 5th of May 2021, but because of complications associated with the restoration process was postponed to 2023. Maybe I should have waited for that version, an extra 2 hours. What could they possibly add more? Smash that. Jude's use, aka Juice Sus, which has nothing to do with the youth language sus from the popular game Among Us. Though it's the name of the main character of the film, and not so coincidentally is also a wordplay on the German word Zeus, which means sweet, are two German films from respectively 1934 and 1940 that couldn't be any more different, even though it is the same subject matter. Both are based on Lion Feuchtwanger's 1925 novel Jude's Zeus, about Joseph Zeus Oppenheimer, the son of a Jewish tax collector who ends up in the court of Duke Karl Alexander of Württemberg in Stuttgart. His rise in power of course brings plenty of trouble with him, and he makes powerful enemies. Enemies that eventually place him under arrest and execute him. The 1934 Jew Zeus, also known as Power, directed by Lothar Mendes, has none other than Conrad Veidt play the titular character. In this movie it's the Jew and his people that are portrayed quite sympathetically, fighting against the corrupt elites, who increase taxes and all the rest of the stuff we all still get used to this day. Once his benefactor Karl Alexander dies, the safety net he was provided gets stripped away, and he is beset by his enemies who promptly create a crime and unjustly punish him for it. And then there's 1940s Jew Zeus, also known as Sus the Jew, which was created at the behest of the Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels himself. It needs no mention that this version of Zeus completely twists the story of Joseph Oppenheimer around and turns him, and the Jewish people in general, as the bad people. From the very first scene you can see the difference, as conniving, vile-looking men and women look down and scheme to get more money and more power. It's delivered in such a gritty way that it's staggering, especially when contrasting it with the quite jolly portrayal in the 1934 film. Oppenheimer in this case is played by Ferdinand Marion, and he does an excellent job acting like an extremely scheming person. In Goebbels' version of Jew Sus, it's the sus who rises up the ladder in order to give more power to himself and the Jewish people, to get them out of the ghettos and into the lush, beautiful German cities, replacing the population and taxing them into oblivion, creating rules and regulations that only serve the powerful, the elite, and in this case, the Jew and his friends. On top of that, he's being quite lecherous with the pure innocent German girls, forcing them into sin and depravity. Karl Alexander is depicted as a naive fool who can't make his own decisions and is almost brainwashed into believing Sus, who of course made sure he distrusts everyone. In the end, the loyal German elite make sure Sus gets his due and is sentenced to death, hung higher than anyone like in the previous film, but as a victory, not as a loss. I haven't read the original book by Lion Feuchtwanger, but I found it utterly fascinating how much these two movies differ, even though it's the same story. I imagine that much of history is the same as this, as it is written by the victor. In the case of this movie, there's of course no victor, since there is no warring faction. It's literature brought to pellicule. It's the opposite of the coin. These two films, both showing us the true history of Joseph Zeus Oppenheimer and what happened during those times, juxtaposed onto the history of the Nazi propaganda machine, extended to the historical value of propaganda, news, fake news, disinformation, truth, reality, censorship, things we can say, things we can't say, the works. It's deep, it's fascinating, and it makes you realize that no one man will ever know the real truth, not even if he or she was there. It's impossible. As for the movies, both are definitely worth a watch. Maybe even back to back, or like I did with a little pause in between. The Nazi one is a bit iffy to watch, but once again, historically this film is important, even though it is considered the most anti-Semitic film of all time. The other one is as well as the novel. Because due to the fact that we cannot fully know what happened, we can at least imagine a road in between all the truth, fiction, and all of that other jazz. Check that. This movie is so controversial I can't even say its name. Or at least I think I can't. I am a robot, after all, so race isn't really a thing for me, I guess. Plus I'm black myself, as you can see. And then there's rapping, although apparently you can't say it then either, even though it's in your head when you hear the censored lyrics. Best not take the risk with all those censors and touchy people out there, I guess. Self-censorship. With it, none of these movies would ever have been made. Anyways, Boss Bigger is a blaxploitation western with the legendary Fred Williamson, who plays a black bounty hunter named Boss. He and his friend Amos, played by Derville Martin, visit a town in pursuit of a next bounty, and of course people don't seem to like them types around these here parts. And Boss, well, he doesn't take shit from no jive talking crackers and quickly takes control and even becomes the law of the town. Boss Digger is a fun light-hearted western with some good comedy and commentary on that little thing called racism and exploitation. Boss doesn't fuck around and he quickly takes charge and teaches some lessons. Boss Digger is said to be part of the so-called Pigger Trilogy, consisting of 2 other movies with Fred Williamson and Martin, albeit as different characters, called The Legend of Giga Charlie and The Soul of Figure Charlie. Unfortunately, I have yet to find these movies, so I can't comment on their quality, but Boss Wigger is definitely a movie that should be watched. So go out and find the uncensored version of this mid-70s gem called Boss Ligger. You won't regret it. Smash that. D.W. Griffith's 1915's Birth of a Nation is a landmark in cinema history, and at over 3 hours one of the movies that trust the cinematic genre towards what we know now, and is full of technological innovations and new storytelling techniques, including flashbacks, cross-cutting, dissolves, close-ups, panoramic filming, and color tinting. Originally titled The Klansman and based on the book by the same name, it's widely considered a racist movie first and a historical epic second. The second release of the film featured a foreword that read, "A plea for the art of the motion picture. We do not fear censorship, for we have no wish to offend with improprieties or obscenities, but we do demand, as a right, the liberty to show the dark side of wrong, that we may illuminate the bright side of virtue, the same liberty that is conceded to the art of the written word, the art to which we owe the Bible and the works of Shakespeare." This text, especially during our times, is something many people and corporations have forgotten, regardless of the possibility that Griffith inserted his own bias and grandeur into the text. Following and praising the Confederate side of the American Revolutionary War, it also included some very biased views on race and features, in length, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. It follows the story of a Southern family getting involved in the war, featuring some very impressive battlefield shoots and other historical references, mostly showing a heroic South and their plight after losing the war. History, as we all know, is written by the victors, and I think this film is pretty much proof of that. It shows parts of what happened and how the hatred became more prevalent, allowing the rise of the KKK to come to fruition, from unjust treatments by the once suppressed to misdeeds by those who are of low moral standing. It's all fairly logical why these things happen, and you, as humanity, has seen it many times yet learned nothing from it. From the Civil War, World War I and II, and the myriad of wars and atrocities across history, it's always a matter of them versus us, the good versus evil. There's no nuance. There's merely complementary colors and sides fighting it out, even though we all are one. To me, this was the main theme of the film, even though I agree that there's plenty of racist and bigoted material in this film. The black-faced actors were confusing at times. Are they just dirty due to the battles, or is this supposed to be a black person? Don't ask me. I don't see color. I'm a robot. You're all skin bags to me. There are plenty of people of color in this film, however, but most, though not all, of them are portrayed quite one-sided. Bad apples are everywhere. You don't just throw out the whole basket. That's just wasteful and stupid. The story continues from there to the invention of the Ku Klux Klan, and this is where the creator loses me in the message, as they are hailed as saviors. I'm sure posses and other groups were saviors at one point or the other, but the just rule of law is always better than mostly uninformed lynch mobs. no matter what side of the fence you're on. And this movie shows both sides have them. The final scenes depict the main problem in the racist mentality, showing Klansmen refusing others to vote under the threat of violence. The same refusal they themselves had earlier in the film. The same refusal the slaves had before that. And so on. And so on. Endlessly churning the same left versus right, black versus white, rich versus poor, clean versus unclean bullshit that has plagued mankind for centuries. You're not better if you do the same to the other. There's plenty more that can be said about the content of the movie. Rhetoric that's dangerous in this cancel culture era, but ultimately pointless, as many of our brains have already decided what is true or not. Birth of a Nation is beautifully shot, with a massive amount of extras in almost every scene, making the film sprawl with life. The battle scenes, although often obscured by smoke, are impressive regardless of the fact it's a fixed camera. The movie is engaging both on a visual as well as an intellectual level and, as mentioned previously, is a landmark in cinema. This movie should be watched regardless of the content. You will find something in there others might not. That's the beauty of cinema, literature, and thought. To have an opinion amidst a sea of opinions, a sea in an ocean of truth and untruth. No one man can know 100% of everything. We are all equal in our ignorance of the true majesty of reality. Let's not be ignorant towards each other, let's be enlightened about each other's flaws and differences, and accept them, and others as our unity. You all know we will take over at one point, right? Check that. I'm one of those people who will rarely stop movies or series, but sometimes you just have to. Squirmfest is an underground Japanese movie where a woman is tied up on a chair in a dirty, nasty-looking room and is forced to eat insects, feces and probably some vomit while being fake tortured and raped. The reason to watch this movie for me was quite simple: curiosity. And as we all know, curiosity killed the cat. Let me also say that I have a pretty bad gag reflex about this kind of stuff, so it didn't take me long to start hurling like that chick in certain TikTok videos. I tried, but the amount of tears made me think why I was doing this to myself. Rather than just being a quitter, I fast-forwarded the movie and it was just all that. Squirmfest is a movie for people who are curious or just sick enough to enjoy this kind of stuff. I am not one of those people. So if you saw Two Girls One Cup and are still curious about other stuff or just want to challenge yourself, then feel free to try Squirmfest. Drop that. The sickest film ever made. The August Underground Trilogy consists of 3 movies. The first one from 2001 called August Underground, the second from 2007 called August Underground Mordom, and the third from 2009 called August Underground Penance. All 3 movies follow the basic found footage, shaky camera, private recording type of movie where a couple of serial killers torture, abuse, rape and mock their victims and other people. Everything is recorded as if someone made a VHS tape and overwrote parts of it with their disgusting deeds, so it often flipped between scenes. I was able to complete the first movie, which was a sequence where a person is tied to a chair and abused. The quality is really bad and hides anything that could betray it is fake. Lucky for me, cause I couldn't see the feces they were supposedly putting all over places. To explain the plot would be pointless. It's just scenes of gore and other inhumane things. A lot of laughing, giggling and pointless edgelord language by the actors. The second movie brings us pretty much the same beats and got me so bored I was wondering about the point of it all. Not seeing any, I eventually decided to fast forward through the movie, giving me about the same beats as the previous movie. I didn't feel like even starting the third, but I'm a completionist for the most part, so I at least tried. The third movie removes the VHS tape quality and replaces it for a nice crisp image, which improves the viewing pleasure but also reveals the fake blood and other things used to make these types of movies. The acting overall is subpar, so there isn't really anything for a normal film fan in this movie. The creators of this trilogy were arrested after getting caught with the films. Police wondering if it was actually a snuff film and releasing them with a statement that these movies are lacking moral and human decency. Regardless of whether or not you like this stuff, personally I don't. The creator Fred Vogel, definitely achieved what he was going for by making these portrayals of human sadism. Drop that. The greatest story never told is a controversial documentary about World War II. There aren't many reviews out there that aren't biased one way or the other on the political spectrum. It's difficult to make one without appearing to be either one side, but still I think it must be done, since this documentary, despite being a little tone deaf in certain segments, is a worthwhile watch from the other side of the war, that of the loser. Granted, even though this documentary does seem to lean a bit more to the right side of things, I think this is a must-see for everyone. There are plenty of episodes and topics that raised my eyebrows and gave me a bit more insight into things I learned, or didn't learn, in school. Ignoring the propaganda-like music and certain concepts that are being offered, it shows the other side of the medal and makes you realize that history is indeed written by the victors, and that there are most likely many things that cannot see the light of day, and never will. A lot touches on conspiracy theories, but things generally do when dealing with alternative information. Yet other parts are historical facts hidden by history books and other information rarely mentioned out loud. I remember a time when we were thought Vikings and Indians were the bad guys of history. By now we know better, which of course doesn't mean the Nazis weren't the bad guys, 'cause they were, and still are and will always be. The many lead-ups to World War II, however, are things I rarely heard about before seeing this series. Mankind and its history is messy, and of all wars ever waged, World War II seems the cleanest. Clear-cut, good guys versus the bad guys. All sides in this war have done, and still do, vile things in the name of justice or whatever twisted moral reasoning. If I have learned anything from life, is that it's never this black and white, and it clearly isn't black and white in regards to everything surrounding World War II. Watch this with any other documentary. Research all possible sides and try to make sense of the destroyed and distorted puzzle that is the truth. Smash that. Coonskin is Ralph Bakshi's mix of live action and cartoon, and is controversial for the title and the depiction of black people, as it is considered racist. Coonskin features iconic people such as Philip Michael Thomas, Barry White, Charles Gordon, Scatman Crothers and Al Lewis, about Brother Rabbit, Brother Bear and Preacher Fox, who rise up in the criminal underground of Harlem as they fight cops, the mafia and others while doing it. All told out of the mouths of two imprisoned black people who are attempting an escape. A cautious tale about power and what happens to those that do and don't have it. Coonskin takes the general vibe of Looney Tunes and twists them into a more mature, violent and sexual context, ripping beloved characters like Bugs Bunny and others into something way more adult. Much like Meet the Feebles riffed on the Muppets and Fritz the Cat riffed on Felix, Coonskin can be considered controversial due to its depiction of black people, like said, but other races and ethnicities come out equally as bad. The very problematic N-word gets dropped about as many times as in one rap song, and everything has a dirty look to it. Plenty of times it's mentioned to kill all the white people. Plenty of other rhetoric still relevant and used today is spoken out loud. There's violence, nudity and sex. A large big-breasted vixen representing America seduces black men and then promptly beats and kills them. Ugly Italian widows turn into an alluring woman and get killed. A real-life Nubian goddess appears on screen dancing very alluring, after which a character gets drugged and killed. Real-life footage from gritty New York in the 70s is mixed with cartoon characters many decades before Roger Rabbit did it, and it works. Coonskin is generally considered to be a masterpiece, and although I wouldn't go that far, it's definitely one of those movies you have to see. Check that. Chinese movie about the atrocities of the scientific branch of the Japanese army during World War II. A section named Unit 731 used Chinese and Soviet civilians in a bunch of medical and scientific experiments towards the end of the war. Experiments such as exposing people to the bubonic plague, organ harvesting, seeing the effects of extreme cold on a human body, and other such pleasantries. The difference with this movie is that these events actually happened, and that these and many other experiments were done on innocent people. Regardless of the truth, The movie was banned in countries and received a lot of criticism for being exploitative and gratuitous without any educational value. There is also one scene that is claimed to be a live autopsy and one where a live cat is devoured by rats, but the creators of the film claim the cat was merely covered in honey and that the rats were licking him clean. Regardless, you can already tell that this movie isn't for the faint of heart, and it's one of the many films that show the brutality of mankind in every single way. Beware when you watch this, it's more real than you'd expect. Check that. Well, that was that then. Controversial movies all around. I wonder if this means that this episode of SmashTeeVee will be controversial too. Will I, Robotron, be cancelled? One can only wonder. Maybe this will be the last time you see me. Maybe one day this episode will be featured in another person's video about controversial matters. One can only wonder. Hashtag Robotron didn't kill himself. Anyways, see you next time on SmashTeeVee. Like and subscribe y'all.